Washington State setting another record when it comes to the amount of money they're having to pay out in lawsuits. This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure you sign up for their newsletter to be alerted to opportunities to do just that. Another record-setting year, and not in a good way. This from the Washington State Standard. WA sets another record with growing lawsuit costs. The state spent $537 million in one fiscal year as the financial toll mounts from years of claims of government misconduct. So let me give some background to all of this, because we'll get into, where a lot of these cases are coming from. So first of all, I'll say for the record, when the government does something wrong, I think that people need to be made whole. I'm suing the government right now over the press pass issue. And so, I'm not saying this is a hard issue because, as I'm going to discuss, I think the government pays out too much money in certain cases and has set themselves up for this in a way where it's being abused a little bit. And I think depending on the kinds of cases, the government will settle like this because, it's not their money and whatever it is, just write them a big fat check. As an example, in the city of Seattle on a smaller scale. So when an entity like the Seattle Times sues over public records issues, the city of Seattle will be like, we're sorry, here it is, take a big fat check, Seattle Times, because it's just going to reporting that supports us and supports our political causes. When I sued the city of Seattle over a cut and dry public records issue, what is that, 4 years ago now? We still don't have a final outcome. We won in the Court of Appeals. The city waited until the clock was almost out, appealed to the state Supreme Court, which had already decided, not to challenge it previously or not to take up the case previously. But they're just running out the clock. In the meantime, we're racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, which they're eventually going to have to pay. But because they wanted to stick it to the conservative and didn't want to have to write me a check, they're like, we'll drain all our resources. We'll spend as much taxpayer money as we need on this. So a little bit of context here. A couple years ago, Washington state lawmakers decided to change the laws around lawsuits that specifically involved child sex abuse. So they basically said, moving forward from 2024 on, there's no statute of limitations, meaning that you could, if you were a child who was abused in the custody of the state or DSHS, then you could sue at any point from the abuse till, you're in your 90s and on your deathbed. But retroactively, they also made it very easy to bring up these kinds of cases from decades ago. Rather than read you the RCW that changed, there's actually this law office that I thought explained it in an easier way. And I wanted to read you how the law office characterizes it, because that shows, how they take these cases from clients and, help build cases and lawsuits against the state of Washington from things that allegedly happened decades ago. So as I said, after June 6, 2024, there is no statute of limitations anymore. However, you can also sue the state of Washington or any private entity. This applied not just to lawsuits against the state, but any private entity involving child sex abuse. So either if it happened after June 6, 2024, no statute of limitations. But if it's before that, it can be 3 years from the act itself, if you realized the harm it caused right away. 3 years from discovery, if you realized later, even decades later, that the abuse caused your injury or condition. Or 3 years from discovering a specific injury. If you discover a new or deeper impact later, you have 3 years from that discovery to bring a claim. Okay, so think about that for a second. If you say that you were molested by a foster parent under the, care of the Department of Social and Health Services in the 1970s, and now you're 55 years old, 60 years old, you could say, well, I've just realized that this caused my anxiety. I've just realized that childhood abuse 50 years ago caused me harm. The changes in the law in 2024 allow you now to sue over it. So that has led to an influx of lawsuits around the issue of child sex abuse against private entities, but also against the government. And so that's why you're seeing $500 million in payouts and these record payouts. So again, from the state standard, the latest total of $537 million accounts for payments from July 1st of last year to June 30th of this year. The State Department of Children, Youth, and Families makes up most of the cases, about $388 million. And that's not a surprise because of what we just discussed. They opened up the floodgates. It says, as the cases stack up, so do the legal fees. The state spent $32 million on lawyers and staff in the Attorney General's office, plus $43 million on outside law firms, for a total of more than $76 million. That's up from $58 million the year before. And again, none of this is a surprise when you consider the changes in the law that allowed people from decades and decades ago to say, oh, now I want to sue the state for the abuse that I may or may not have suffered, frankly. And how do you prove it? Now, I'm not defending the state in that. If the state was complicit and a child was abused under the care of the state of Washington, I think they should be made whole again. But how do you prove a case or disprove a case from 50, 40, 30 years ago, where the person they're accusing, maybe a foster parent, might not even be alive? And so what I've been told is that essentially you have some unscrupulous attorneys who will seek out people who were in foster care decades ago and basically build a case around it because they know that the state of Washington can't really disprove it, and they'll just write them a check for $100,000. $100,000 to go away, $100,000 to go away. And so you have these attorneys who know that. And whether the allegations are true or not, they're going to get some sort of check from the state of Washington. And as much as I want, again, child abuse victims to be made whole, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Moving forward, by all means, let's do this in a different way. But going back that long, and it's the taxpayers who are footing the bill for it, that doesn't make a lot of sense either. So what are they going to do about it? The Standard says it's a bandage for the problems. The legislature approved $1 billion earlier this year to shore up the state self-insurance fund. And then they did what? They did what they do best. Let's appoint a panel to this. Let's get great minds in a room and think it through. A new panel is tasked with proposing systemic changes to stem the flow of claims and resulting multi-million-dollar payouts, kneecapping the state. State leaders have floated ideas to help address the issue. One from Ferguson would have set up an administrative panel to specifically handle years-old cases against the State Department of Children, Youth, and Families. Lawmakers this year proposed requiring arbitration for civil cases against governments, leaving the outcome to a neutral third party in hopes of speeding up cases. Ohio has a model somewhat similar to this called Court of Claims, but the bill was watered down in the legislative process and stalled in the face of staunch opposition from trial lawyers who bring these cases, of course, because they want maximum damage. And I'm not saying all of them are unscrupulous or all of the claims are unjustified. We already know what an absolute you-know-what the Department of Children, Youth, and Families is. Poorly run, mismanaged, and they are not looking out for the best interests of kids. So do I not believe that there's a bunch of legitimate child abuse claims that happen under the watchful eye of the state? Of course I believe that there are. But I also think that this has opened up the door for this to be abused. And it's not just child abuse cases. Like, for instance, there was this lawsuit involving teacher pensions that the state is now having to pay out on. This just came out yesterday. WA ordered to pay $118 million in teacher pension skimming case. And this is a case that dates back to the 1990s and involved withholding interest earned by over 2,600 teachers. So you have all these cases in the middle of a budget crisis. And why we wonder why they're passing new taxes left and right. One, they can't get their spending under control. And then two, they're getting sued all over the place. And then at the same time, they're suing the Trump administration every other day. This doesn't even get into how much the state of Washington has spent suing the Trump administration in his first term and in this term. We sue him, I think, more than any other state in the nation. And then, on top of that, the state of Washington is taking on other ideological battles. I've already said, they've spent probably at this point, I would guess, $150,000 in their efforts to stop me and Ari Hoffman and Jonathan Cho from getting press passes. And they'll probably have to spend more than $1 million before it's all done. And we're in a budget crisis. But they'd rather do that than let the three of us come down to Olympia a couple times a year and ask a few hard questions. So, I mean, they're hand-wringing over all this money they're putting out. But they also have no issue spending a lot of money suing Trump and spending a lot of money trying to control who's the media and who's not the media. So, yeah, there needs to be a fix to this. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to let people go back 40, 50 years in the past and say, oh, I have a new injury, because you can never prove those cases beyond a reasonable doubt unless you've saved some sort of evidence or someone confesses to it. So we have to be realistic here. Make people whole, you know, who were abused and have strong cases, but what's happening in the state of Washington is just ridiculous. That segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure you sign up for their newsletter to be alerted to opportunities to do just that.